I'm Ryan O'Doud, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today we're continuing with 16.4 of The Path to Sufism by Al-Ghazali, picking up at the true nature of prophecy and the need all men have for it. Know that man's essence in his original condition is created in blank simplicity without any information about the worlds of God Most High. These worlds are so many that only God Most High can number them. As he has said, no one knows the hosts of your Lord but he. 74.3431. Man gets his information about the worlds by means of perception. Each one of his kinds of perception is created in order that man may get to know thereby a world of the existence. And by worlds we mean the categories of existing things. The first thing created in man is the sense of touch. By this he perceives certain classes of existence such as heat and cold, wetness and dryness, smoothness and roughness, etc. But touch is definitely unable to perceive colors and sounds. Indeed, these are, as it were, non-existent with respect to touch. Next, the sense of sight is created for man, by which he perceives colors and shapes. This is the most extensive of the worlds of the sensibilities. Then the sense of hearing is opened, so that man hears sounds and tones. Next, the sense of taste is created for man, and so on, until he passes beyond the world of the sensibles. Then when he's about 7 years old, discernment is created for him. This is another of the stages of man's existence. In it he perceives things beyond the world of the sensibles, none of which are found in the world of sensation. Then man ascends to another stage, and intellect is created for him, so that he perceives the necessary, the possible, the impossible, and things not found in the previous stages. Beyond that stage of intellect, there's another stage. In this, another eye is opened, by which man sees the hidden, and what will take place in the future, and other things, from which the intellect is as far removed as the power of discernment is from the perception of intelligibles, and the power of sensation is from those things perceived by discernment. And just as one is able only to discern, if presented with the things perceptible to the intellect, would reject them and consider them outlandish, so some men endowed with intellect have rejected the things perceptible to the prophetic power, and consider them wildly improbable. That is the very essence of ignorance. For such a man has no supporting reason except that it is a stage he himself has not attained, and for him it does not exist. So he supposes that it does not exist in itself. Now, if a man born blind did not know about colors and shapes from constant report and hearsay, and were to be told about them abruptly, he would neither understand them nor acknowledge their existence. But God Most High has brought the matter within the purview of his creatures, by giving them a sample of the special characteristic of the prophetic power, sleeping. For the sleeper perceives the unknown that will take place, either plainly or in the guise of an image, the meaning of which is disclosed by interpretation. If a man had no personal experience of dreaming and someone were to tell him, there are some men who fall down unconscious as though they were dead, and their perception, hearing, and sight leave them, and then perceive what is hidden, he would deny it and give apodictic proof of its impossibility by saying, the sensory powers are the causes of perception. Therefore, one who does not perceive such things when his powers are present and functioning a fortiori will not perceive them when his powers are suspended. This is a kind of analogy which is bellied by factual experience and observation. Just as the intellect is one of man's stages in which he receives an eye by which he sees various species of intelligibles from which the senses are far removed. The prophetic power is an expression signifying a stage in which man receives an eye possessed of light, and in its light the unknown and other phenomena, not normally perceived by the intellect, become visible. Doubt about prophecy touches either its possibility or its actual existence, or its belonging to the specific individual. The proof of its possibility is its existence, and the proof of its existence is the existence of the world of knowledge, which could not conceivably be obtained by the intellect alone, such as the knowledge of medicine and of astronomy. For whoever examines such knowledge knows of necessity that it can be obtained only by a divine inspiration and a special help from God Most High, and that there's no empirical way to it. Thus, among astronomical phenomena, there is a phenomenon which occurs only once every 1,000 years. How then could knowledge of that be obtained empirically? The same is true of the properties of medicaments. From this proof, it's clearly within the bounds of possibility that a way exists to grasp these things which the intellect does not normally grasp. This is what is meant by prophecy. Not that prophecy signifies such knowledge only, rather the perception of this kind of thing, which is outside the things normally perceived by the intellect, is one of the properties of prophecy. It also has many other properties. When we have mentioned it as a drop from its sea, we've mentioned it only because you have, in your experience, an example of it. These the things you perceive while asleep. You also have knowledge of the same sort in medicine and astronomy. These two belong to the category of the prophets' apologetic miracles. The blessing and peace of God be upon them. But men endowed with intellect have no way at all of attaining such knowledge by intellectual resources alone. The properties of prophecy beyond those just mentioned can only be perceived by fruitional experience as a result of following the way of Sufism. For you have understood that only because of an example you have been given, sleep, were it not for this you would not assent to that. If then the prophet has a special quality of which you have no example, and which you in no wise understand, how can you find it credible? Assent comes only after understanding, but the example needed occurs in the first stages of the way of Sufism. Then, through this example, one obtains a kind of fruitional experience commensurate with the progress made, plus a kind of assent to what has not been attained based on analogy with what has been attained. So this single property we have mentioned is enough ground for you to believe in the basis of prophecy. If it occurs to you to doubt whether a particular individual is a prophet or not, certainty will be gained only by becoming acquainted with circumstances, either through personal observation or from impeccable tradition and hearsay. For when you are familiar with medicine and jurisprudence, you can recognize jurisprudence and physicians by observing their circumstances, and also by hearing their dicta, even if you have not seen them yourself. Moreover, you are quite capable of knowing that Al-Shafi'i, God's mercy be upon him, was a jurisprudent, and that Galen was a physician, and that with a knowledge based on fact, not on uncritical acceptance of someone's say-so, by your learning something about jurisprudence and medicine, and then pursuing their writings and works, thus you will acquire a necessary knowledge of their scientific status. Likewise, when you understand the meaning of prophecy and devote much study to the Quran and the traditions, you will acquire the necessary knowledge of the fact that Muhammad, God's blessings and peace be upon him, had attained the loftiest level of prophecy. Then came back that up by sampling what he said about the acts of worship and their effect on the purification of hearts. Consider, for example, how right he was, God's blessing and peace be upon him, in his saying, whoever acts according to what he knows, God will make him heir to what he does not know. And how right he was in his saying, whoever aids an unjust man, God gives the latter dominion over him. And how right he was in his saying, whoever reaches the point where all his cares are a single care, God Most High will save him from all cares in this life and the next. When you have had that experience in 1,000, 2,000, and many thousand of instances, you will have acquired a necessary knowledge which will be indisputable. Therefore seek sure and certain knowledge of prophecy in this way, not from changing of the staff into a serpent in the splitting of the moon, for if you consider that sort of thing alone, without adding the many, indeed innumerable circumstances accompanying it, you might think it was a case of magic and deception, and that it was leading astray, coming from God Most High, because he leads astray whom he will and rightly guides who he will. 1695-93. And the problems connected with apologetic miracles would confront you. Furthermore, if your faith were based on a carefully ordered argument about the way the apologetic miracle affords proof of prophecy, your faith would be broken by an equally well-ordered argument showing how difficulty and doubt may affect that mode of proof. Therefore, let such preternatural events be one of the proofs and concomitants that make up your total reflection in the matter. As a result, you will acquire such necessary knowledge that you will be unable to cite its specific basis. It would be like the case of a man to whom many men report an unimpeachable tradition. He cannot aver that his sure and certain knowledge is derived from the statement of one specific individual. Rather, he does not know whence it comes, but it is neither outside the group testimony, nor it is due to pinpointing individuals. This, then, is the strong belief based on knowledge. Fruitional experience, on the other hand, is comparable to actual seeing and handling. This is found only in the way of the Sufis. This much, then, of the real meaning of prophecy is sufficient for my present purpose. Now I shall mention the reason why it is needed. The reason for resuming teaching after having given it up. A. Doctors of Hearts. For nearly 10 years, I assiduously cultivated seclusion and solitude. During that time, several points became clear to me of necessity for reasons I cannot enumerate. At one time by fruitional experience, at another time by knowledge based on apodictic proof, and again by acceptance founded on faith. These points were, that man is formed of a body and a heart, and by the heart I mean the essence of man's spirit, which is the seed of his knowledge of God, not the flesh which man has in common with corpse and beast, that his body may have a health which will result in its happiness, and a malady in which lies its ruin, that his heart likewise may have a health and soundness, and only he will be saved who comes to God with a sound heart. 2689. And it may have a malady which will lead to his everlasting perdition in the next life, as God Most High has said, in their hearts is a malady. 2, 9, and 10. That ignorance of God is the heart's deadly poison. Disobedience to God is incapacitating malady. Knowledge of God Most High is quickening antidote, and obedience to him by resisting passion its healing remedy, that the only way to treat the heart by removing its malady and regaining its health lies in the use of remedies, just as that is the only way to treat the body. Remedies for the body effectively procure health because of a property in them which men endowed with intellect cannot perceive by virtue of their intellectual resources, but rather it must be the object of blind obedience to the physicians who learned it from the prophets, who, because of the special attribute of prophecy, came to know the special property of things. In a similar fashion, it became necessarily evident to me that the reason for the effectiveness of the remedies of the acts of worship, with their prescriptions and determined quantities ordained by the prophets, cannot be determined quantities cannot be perceived by means of the intellectual resources of men endowed with intellect. On the contrary, they must be the object of blind obedience to the prophets who perceived those qualities by a light of prophecy, not by intellectual resource. Moreover, just as medicaments are composed of mixtures of elements differing in kind and quality, some of them being double others in weight and quantity, and just as the difference of their quantities is not without a profound significance pertaining to the kind of properties, so likewise the acts of worship, which are remedies of hearts, are composed of actions differing in kind and quality, so that a prostration is the double of a bowing, and the morning prayer is half as long as the afternoon prayer. The difference is not without a profound significance which pertains to the kind of the properties knowable only by the light of the prophecy. Very stupid and ignorant would be the man who would wish to discover in them a wisdom by means of reason, or who would suppose that they have been mentioned by chance, and not because of a profound divine significance in them, which requires them to be such because of the special property in them. And just as in medicaments there are basic elements which are their chief ingredients and additional substances which are their complements, each of them having a special effect on the workings of their basic elements, so likewise supererogatory prayers and customary practices are complements for perfecting the effects of the principal elements of the acts of worship. In general, then, the prophets, peace be upon them, are the physicians for treating the maladies of hearts. By its activity, reason is useful simply to acquaint us with this fact, to bear witness to prophecy by giving assent to its reality, to certify its own blindness, to perceive what the eye of prophecy perceives, and to take us by our hands and turn us over to the prophets as blind men are handed over to guides, and as troubled sick men are handed over to sympathetic physicians. To this point, reason can proceed in advance, but it is far removed from anything beyond that, except for understanding what the physician prescribes. These, then, are the insights we gained with a necessity analogous to direct vision during the period of our solitude and seclusion. B. The slackness of faith. Then we saw the lukewarmness of man's belief in the basis of prophecy, and consequently in the reality of prophecy and in action in accord with the data of prophecy. We also ascertained that this was widespread among men. I then reflected on the reasons for men's lukewarmness and the weakness of their faith, and found them to be four in number. 1. A reason stemming from those engrossed in the science of philosophy. 2. A reason stemming from those absorbed in the way of Sufism. 3. A reason stemming from those attached to the claim of authoritative teaching. And 4. A reason stemming from the behavior of these popularly regarded as preeminent in learning. For a period of time, I next addressed myself successfully to individuals, questioning those who were remiss in fulfilling the law. I would ask a man about his specious reason. for that an inquiry into his belief and his inner convictions, asking him, "Why are you so remiss? If you believe in the afterlife but do not prepare yourself for it and barter for it for this life, why this is stupidity? You would not ordinarily barter these two things for one. How then can you barter what is unending for a limited number of days? And if you do not believe, then you are an infidel. So act wisely in the quest for faith, and look into the cause of your hidden unbelief. For this is your real inner conviction and the cause of your outward boldness, even though you do not openly express it, because you want to bedrock yourself with the trappings of faith and to be respected for paying lip service to the law." One man would reply, "If this were a matter one that was bound to serve, then the learned would be those most properly bound to it. But of those most renowned among the learned, so-and-so does not perform the prescribed prayer, and such a one drinks wine, and another devours the assets of religious endowments and the property of orphans, and another feathers his nest with the lavish largesse of the Sultan, without being wary of what is illicit, and another accepts bribes for judgment and testimony, and so on in many similar instances. A second man would claim to be an adept in the science of Sufism, and allege that he had attained a degree beyond the need for formal worship. And a third would offer as his excuse one of the specious reasons advanced by the licentious. These are the erring who profess the way of Sufism. A fourth respondent would have had contact with the Ptolemaites, so he would declare, "The truth is doubtful, the way to it hard, there is much disagreement about it, and no one view is preferable to any other. Moreover, rational proofs contradict one another, so that no reliance can be placed on the opinion of independent thinkers. But the advocates of authoritative teaching makes categorical pronouncements without needing any proof. How then can we give up the certain because of the uncertain?" The fifth man would say, "I do not do this out of servile conformism, but I have studied the science of philosophy, and I have grasped the real meaning of prophecy. I know that it comes down to what is wise and beneficial, and that the aim of its religious prescriptions is to control the common people and to curb them from internecine strife and contention, and from unrestrained indulgence in their passions. Here I am not one of the ignorant masses, and therefore subject to commandment. Rather, I am one of the wise, saying the way of wisdom, and well versed in it, and in my wisdom I can get along without servile conformism. This is the limit reached by the faith of those who have studied the philosophy of the theistic philosophers, that it is known from the books of Ibn Sina and Abu Nasir al-Farabi. These are the men who bedeck themselves with the trappings of Islam. Often you see one of them reciting the Quran and attending the assemblies and public prayers and paying great lip service to the Sharia. But despite that, he does not give up his wine-bibbing and various kinds of depravity and debauchery. If he is asked, if prophecy is not authentic, why do you pray? He may reply, it's an ascesis of the body and custom to the local people, and a way to preserve fortune and family. And he may say, the Sharia is authentic and prophecy is genuine. Then one should say, why then do you drink wine? And he may say, wine was prohibited simply because it causes enmity and hatred. But I, by my wisdom, can guard against that. My only aim in drinking is to stimulate the mind. Indeed, Ibn Sina went so far as to write in a testament of his that he made a pact with God to do certain things, and that he would extol the ordinances of the law, and would not be remiss in performing the religious acts of worship, nor would he drink for pleasure, but only for medicinal purposes and to promote his health. So the furthest he got respecting the purity of faith and the obligation of acts of worship was to make an exception for wine-bibbing on the score of promoting his health. Such is the faith of these philosophers who pretend to have faith. Many indeed have been deceived by them, and their deception has been intensified by the weak arguments of those who oppose the philosophers. For their opposition was to repudiate the sciences of geometry and logic and others, which for the philosophers are true of necessity, according to the reasoned explanation we have set forth previously. C. My return to teaching. I saw then that for such reasons as these the faith of the various classes of men had become so weak. Also I considered myself so skilled a practitioner in exposing such sophistries that exposing them was easier for me than downplaying a mouthful of water, because I had studied deeply their sciences and methods. I mean the methods of the Sufis and the philosophers and the Ptolemites and the distinguished ulama. It then flashed into my mind that engaging in that activity was a matter destined and inevitable at such a time. What will solitude and seclusion avail you when the disease has become endemic, the physicians are sick, and men are on the brink of perdition? Then I said to myself, when will you devote yourself completely to laying bare this affliction and to battling against this dreadful darkness? It is a time of tepidity and an era of terror. But even if you were to engage in calling men from their evil ways to the truth, all the men of this age would be hostile to you. How then would you stand up against them? And how could you put up with them? For that could be done only at a favorable time and under a godly and irresistible sultan. Thus I sought a compromise between myself and God Most High, which would permit me to remain in seclusion, alleging as an excuse my inability to expound the truth with competent argument. But God Most High determined to move the Sultan of the time to act on his own, and not because of any external instigation. He peremptorily ordered me to hasten to Nishapur to face the threat of this tepidity. Indeed, so peremptory was his order that had I persisted in refusing to comply, it would have ended in my disgrace. Then it occurred to me that the reason for excusing yourself has lost its force. Hence, your motive for clinging to seclusion ought not to be laziness and ease and self-aggrandizement and protecting yourself from the harm caused by men. Why indeed should you try to find license for such conduct in the difficulty of struggling against men? For God, praised and exalted He, says, do men think they will be left to say we believe without being subject to tribulation? Indeed, we have already tried those who were before them, and assuredly God knows those who speak truly, and assuredly He knows the liars. 29, 1 through 2, 1 through 3. He also says, mighty and glorious He, to His apostle, who is the dearest of His creatures. Apostles before you have already been given the lie, and they endured the false charge of the injury done against them until our help came to them. Now there is no one who can change the words of God, and there has already reached you some report about those we sent. The mighty and glorious also says, in the name of the merciful God, Lord of mercy, by the wise Quran, you are indeed of those we have sent on a straight way, sent down by the sending of the mighty, the merciful, to warn a people by whose fathers were not warned, so that they are heedless. True indeed what has been said against most of them, for they do not believe. Assuredly we have placed on their necks iron collars, chin high, so that their heads are held up. We have also put a barrier before them and a barrier behind them, and we have blinded them so that they do not see. All the same to you whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. You warn them only him who follows the remembrance and fears of Lord of mercy in the unseen. 36, 1 through 10, 1 through 11. Subsequently, I consulted on that matter a number of those skilled in discerning hearts and visions, and they were of one mind in advising me to abandon my seclusion and to emerge from my religious retirement. In addition to that, certain godly men had many recurrent dreams attesting that this move of mine would be a source of good and a right procedure, and that it had been decreed by God praised be He, for the beginning of this century. For God, praised be He, has indeed promised to revivify His religion at the beginning of each century. And so my hope was strengthened, and I became quite optimistic because of these testimonies. God Most High facilitated my move to Nishapur to undertake this serious task in the month of Dhul Qa'dah 499, or July 1st, 1106 AD. My departure from Baghdad had been in Dhul Qa'dah 488, or November 1095 AD, so the period of my seclusion amounted to 11 years. This move to Nishapur was decreed by God Most High, and it was one of the marvels of His foreordinations, not a glimmer of which was in my mind during that period of seclusion. Just as the possibility of my leaving Baghdad and giving up my position there had never occurred to my mind, but God Most High is a changer of minds and states, and the heart of the believer is between two of the fingers of the Lord of mercy. I know well that, even though I have returned to teaching, I have not really returned, for returning is coming back to what was. Formerly I used to impart the knowledge by which glory is gained for God's sake, and to invite men to it by my words and deeds, and that was my aim and intention. But now I invite men to the knowledge of which glory is renounced, and it is lowly rank recognized. This is now my intention, my aim, my desire. God knows that to be true of me. I now earnestly desire to reform myself and others, but I do not know whether I shall attain my desire or be cut off from the death shore of my goal. Yet I believe with a faith as certain as direct vision that there is no might for me and no power save in God, the sublime, the mighty, and that it was not I who moved, but He moved me, and that I did not act, but He acted through me. I ask Him then to reform me first, then to use me as an instrument of reform. To guide me, then to use me as an instrument of guidance. To show me the true as true, and to grant me the peace to follow it. And to show me the false as false, and to grant me the grace to eschew it. Thus concludes section 16.4 of The Path to Sufism by Al-Ghazali. We'll pick up next time with section 16.5, starting with the remedies for the tepid. I will see you then. Alam.